Let's get back to doing some JavaScript. And I'll do some fun stuff. Let's say that I have a button here near the dog. Let's do find the IMG here. The Dalmatian dog. Let's add under audio. Add a button here. And let's say pet the dog and some emoji. Um, and then add a dog emoji just for fun. So what I want to do is when I click the button, I want the audio to be played that the dog barks. If you click that, the dog barks. Is it possible? Yes. Let's do it. So first we got to add an on-click and add a function that we would like to execute when we click the button. Let's call it bark and then call the function with parentheses. Now you have to define the function bark by going to the JavaScript file and make sure to define it outside an existing one, either here or there. Okay, I'm going to define it at the bottom here. And function space bark, that's the name. Parentheses, I don't have anything as input, so it's empty inside. And then finally, the body, we add the curly braces. You might have noticed we always add some spacing, at least two, whenever we open a curly brace, and that's called indentation. And it's kind of the same concept we did for HTML when you open a new tag. And it's just for us to understand that whatever we're writing right now is contained within the function that is between the open and closing curly brace. You could have written like this, but as you have more and more code, later on you realize it's really hard to understand visually as you read the code where things are. So that's why we always have indentation. And VS Code by itself will always add automatically when you press enter. Anyway, what we want to do here is to make the barking sound play, you have to first find this audio element and then ask it to play. Now, how do we find that? Well, there are different ways. The way we've learned so far is by element ID, but there's also other ways. So here's the element. We could add an ID here and do get element by ID. That's fine. Let me show you a different way. You could also find this by class name. You add a class, and usually if this class is not something for styling, but for JavaScript, people traditionally would add the suffix JS dash to the class name. Let's call it the JS-audio-player. Now, to find that, we can call in the document, right? And dot, and there are different ways. If I say get element, you see there are some suggestions by VS Code, like get element by ID, by class name, by name, tag name, so on. Now, the one you could do is get elements by class name, but did you notice there's an S, plural for elements? That's because multiple elements could have the same class, which is different from ID. Only one element has that specific ID because it's unique. So if you were to do the elements by class name, and you would have to give, okay, what's the class name? Well, it's JS-audio-player. But then this thing would return not one single thing to you, but many things. Now, we'll talk about that in a bit, but to access the very first thing in this list of things, you have to use square brackets here and give it the position or of this element. In this case, we count from 0, so the 0 position. So assuming there's only one element with this class, JS-audio-player, and that one will be this one on the page, okay? If there's multiple and if there's one before that, it would be the wrong element. But anyway, that's the assumption. There's only one element with this class. So this will return us this audio element, and then we can actually call on that by saying dot, and then call it to play. There's a play function that belongs to that element. So if I click pet, I hear now the dog barking. What's happening is basically the audio auto plays when we click. Okay. Now, other people might be wondering, is there a different way to select that other than ID and elements by class name? Yes. There's also query selector. Let me show you. You can do document dot query selector. Now there's two versions. The one selector, which is to select one thing, it goes through the document, and the first one that it finds, it gives you back. Now, if you do all, it's gonna give you all the elements that match your criteria. So it's a list of things. Now I'm gonna use query selector, and the argument here to the function between the parentheses is actually what looks like a CSS selector. So if you're familiar writing CSS selectors, just put under quotes the selector here. In this case, we would have to select by the class name, which in CSS we write dot and then follow with the class name, js-audio-player. And this will give you back that audio element. And then you can just say dot play parentheses semicolon and try again. Let's test. Click the pet the dog, and I hear the sound of the dogs barking. Now the sound's probably not in the recording, but if you click the button, you can hear. All right, so that's the first fun thing I wanted to do. Now let's move on to another thing, and that's images here. How do we make a button here to make it show another image when you press next, kind of like an image gallery? But before I do that, I forgot to tell you, what's the point of having the audio player there? Can we hide it? Yes, actually go to the audio and remove the controls attribute. And now you don't see it. And then when you press pet the dog, you still hear the sound because the audio player is there. It just doesn't have a user interface of visuals for controls, but it's actually there and it's controlled now by the button, right? Okay, that's cool. Now I want to show you how we can make kind of an image gallery here. Let's add a button after the image. I'll call it next image. What I want to do is when I click next image, this image will change to another one of my choice. Now, what controls the image what's showing? Well, it's the src attribute. So we use JavaScript to manipulate this element, the document. The attribute src will have a different value, right? If we change the value of src, it will appear, another image will appear. So that's what we got to do. So let's add a non-click. And then let's say next image, parentheses, go to JavaScript. Outside the curly braces of the other functions, add another definition of function, next image, parentheses empty because no parameters there. And then here, what we got to do is first find the image. Now the image is there. It doesn't have an ID. We could have an ID, get element by ID. We could add a class and do get elements by class name or query selector of the dot. Now, let me try to show yet another way just for the sake of education, but usually the best way is probably query selector. But let's say documents.get. Let's see what we got here. By name, tag name. How about this one? I wonder if we can give the tag name img. And because this is plural, it will give you many things. So to access that, it's brackets 0. And to change, assuming this is the correct way to find the image, that gives you back the img element. So I can just change the attribute .src by saying .src equals sign, a new value under quotes. Now for the new value, we got to find another image. Let me see if I can find another dog image. Okay, let me try this one here. So I'm gonna use this image. If you can find any image you want, just go to your search engine, image search, click the image, view image, copy the URL of the image, or right click the image, copy image link. Anyway, this is the image URL. Let's see if it's working. Yeah, there you go. When I click next image, it's actually working. So what it does is, okay, we click the button, it calls next image from the top to the bottom. First, we call a document. Please find all the elements by the tag name, which is the element name, img. So it finds this one, img, and access. Because it could be multiple images on the same document, it's going to get the first one, which is sub bracket sub 0. And then for that one, this one gives you the img. And then that .rc gives you access to the source attribute, and you can change it the equal sign, the right-hand side being the new value. Now, the assumption here is there's only one image on the document. That in practice, that's not the case. So this is a really bad way to find the element, okay? So I recommend either add an ID or use query selector with a unique class name that you assume nobody else will use, usually JS-prefix, okay? Okay, now let me show you how you can build like many images. Now for that, we got to learn about arrays. So let's go to the browser. Let me clear this. I'm in the browser console, by the way. Press F12 in any browser. Go to console tab. I can clear with this either trash icon or this negative or denied circle with the cross. So let's learn about arrays. Like I showed you before, there are different ways we can store information in JavaScript. We learn about numbers. There's strings, which is sequence of characters. There's object, which is basically pairs of key and value, that is property, and its value separated by comma. And arrays is basically a list, a sequence of values start grouped together. So as we already learned about variables, right? We can hold things in what's called a variable to use later. But so far we learned that variables, for example, a equals 2 only holds one thing. Let's say word equals hello. But it's only one thing. Can't we just hold multiple things together in a single variable? Yes, with arrays. So let's say I have my favorite fruits. Fruits equals, let's define this variable as a list, or what we call the array. That's the official name. And the syntax is square brackets. Remember, curly brace is object, square brackets is array. So you write the elements, what we call elements, the items to this list, separated by a comma. So if you have nothing, this is an empty array, empty list. If you have one of them, for example, apple, you can place it like that. If you need more than one, separated with a comma. Let's say oranges, orange. And if you want more, comma, banana, like that. And then enter. Now you notice the browser has this nice interface, live visual. It can expand, and I can see this is an array. See prototype array. And it has 1, 2, 3 things. Now those things, those items to this list, they are called elements. So we have the first element, apple, which is a string, a sequence of characters. We have the second element, orange, and the third element. You see the dot length here? This is the attribute of the array, is 3. So whenever you say the variable name dot length, it gives you back how many elements the array has. This variable is holding an array, okay? If you want to access each individual element, you have to use the bracket notation like this. Variable name that holds the array, brackets, square brackets, the index, which is the position of the element. Except here we got to count from 0. You don't count 1, 2, 3. We count 0, 1, 2. So the first element is actually counting from 0. So if you say 0 and close the square bracket, you get back the first element, apple. If you do fruits, square brackets 1, that's the second element. Remember, count from 0, 0, 1. Therefore, is the second, which is orange. And then fruits, brackets 2 is the third, banana. And if you try to do 3, which doesn't exist, it gives you undefined. Now, scrolling back here to the nice live visual, you can see 0 is the index of apple, 1 is the index of orange, 2 of banana. So if you ever forget about the counting, just make it a list like this and expand and see the indices here. Okay, so that's how you access. So that's why we saw just now when we do document, get elements by class name, for example, and I say, for example, JS audio player, this is actually giving me something that looks like an array. In this case, it's an HTML collection. You see the square brackets to indicate it's like HTML like. Now, I think what's going on, audio player? I think I need to refresh the page. Let me refresh so we can see it actually. Let me save all my files in the VS Code and refresh this. Now, I think if I point to the DOM and check the autoplay is still here of the class, right? Now we have it. It wasn't finding before because my code was out of date. Okay, going back to that, you can see when I paste back, you can see it's HTML collection of one thing here. But if I do it like that, I get the collection. If I expand, it's like an array. So you see the first index has this element, which is actually hidden right now, right? Because we can't see visually, but it's there. So length 1, meaning you only found 1. And if you want to access that first element, remember brackets sub 0. And there you go, you got the actual audio thing. Let me do the same with document get elements by tag name. And let's do P because I think there's at least 2 P elements on the page, right? Get elements by tag name. As you can see now, this one is an HTML collection with 3 things. Now, it's not necessarily an array per se, but it's an array-like structure. Therefore, we can think of it the same way. So we have 0, 1, and 2 there. See, if I kind of point to it, it highlights in the content. Uh, like that and like that. This one is, I think, here. So there's 3 elements, so that is 3 paragraphs on this page, this document. If I want to access, for example, the second one, this one, how would I do it? Well, you have to say, by the way, I pressed the up key in the keyboard to access whatever I typed before. Brackets, square brackets, the index, count from 0. So 0, 1 is the second. If you don't remember the counting, just put, okay, second element minus 1, that's index 1. And that gives you back the paragraph, okay? Now this notation here is nice to investigate the properties of the element. So if you expand the first or the second one, you can see all of its properties because it's actually can think of it as an object. So an object has many properties and can investigate all the stuff. Oh, there's a property for class called class name. And remember we did text content? Let's see if we can find it. ... Oh, there you go. This is the text content properties, what we actually see in there, right? This thing. So it's very powerful to debug and understand what's going on. Okay, so now that we know about arrays, let's make the image gallery. Going back to VS Code. What I want to do is I want to actually make an array of image URLs here. So we can either do before all the functions or anywhere outside the function is fine. So let's add a list here, square brackets. And for the sake of readability, I'll break a new line. So the first thing I want to get is the first image. And I'll make a list of image links or URLs. So the first one is that one, but I gotta have quotes because it's a sequence of characters as they are, nothing special. So that's my first image URL. I'm going to separate it with a comma, okay? Comma there, break a line. Now it could be in one line, but it's very long, so I'm separating into multiple lines. Now the second image is the one we just used here, and I'm going to put it here as the second element, comma. Okay. Now we got to find another image. Let me see if I can find. I'm going to go to bing.com, some dog images. How about this one? Like this one. Click view image. Now I got the image open. I can copy the URL from the address bar. Control C in my case, or Command C on Mac. Go back to VS Code. Now the third element will be that URL. And if you want, you can add a dangly comma here. It's totally fine. I usually add it because, I don't want to, it's good for Git diffs and in case, get into the habit of never forgetting. Anyway, so this is an array of 3 image URLs. And I'm going to store in a variable that I'll call images equals sign. Now I need a const for the syntax of the language. I only define it once and only once. I don't need to redefine it. So it's a constant variable. Great. Now, why did I make that? Because I want to be able to switch to a different image every time, meaning first it will show the Dalmatian. When I click next, I want to go and fetch the next element. In this case, is the index 1. And then when I click next image again, index is 2. See that the index starts from 0, and every time I click the button, the index will go increment, right? It goes from 0, then 1, and then 2, and so on if you had more images. Therefore, I must keep track of the current image index here. So let's create a variable for that. Let's call it image. Let's call it current image index for the sake of being descriptive about variable names. I initialize that to 0 because that's the first image I want to show. And let's make it let, not const, because I want to change this value here, that the variable is holding every time I click the button. So I need to make the variable be changing over time, not constant. And I usually like to finish semicolon if you want at the end of everything. Anyway, so what's going to happen here, when I click the button for next image, I want to go to the array and get the next one. But before we do that, let's first increment current image index, change the value to the next one. And to do that, I can do some math, right? So I can take whatever's in current image index. Initially, it's 0. I can add 1 plus 1. And I usually like to add a space. And then I can store that as the new value for current image index. So remember, the thing on the right becomes the new value for the thing on the left. So what's happening here, initially current image index is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. Therefore, 1 becomes stored as the new value for current image index. Okay, keep that in mind. That's what's happening here. Now, that's great, semicolon usually. After that, we have the next image index. I'm going to use that to access the URL. How do I access something in an array? Well, what's the name of the variable holding the array? Images. How do I access an element? Square brackets. What's the index? Well, it's going to be first 0 and then 1 and then 2, but that value is already held by this variable here. Therefore, I can use that name here within the square brackets. So that way, the first time, it's going to be 1 here, right? And then next time is going to be 2, because every time before this line is changing the value of current image index. Finally, this gives me back the URL, but I got to assign that to the source of the image. Therefore, I'm going to take this and put as the right-hand side of that statement. So I find the elements by tag name, the first image, I change the source to whatever this is. And this whatever is just accessing images. Okay, the first time is going to go to images. find the element I index 1, which is this one. So think of it visually as this value going here. Okay? And I like to finish off semicolon. Let's try. Worked. Next time. Remember, current image index right now is 1. When I click, it's going to be true. There you go. Now, if I click again, guess what happens? Current image index will be 3, but that's undefined. So broken image. Now, I leave it to you as an exercise to figure out how you could first add a previous image button. And that one would just add a new function, previous image. And instead of adding, you just subtract 1. Now, for the thing of next image, there's different ways, right? One way is you could check, okay, if I reach the end, I don't want to go to any other image. I can stop, not do anything. Another thing you could do is, what if I circulate back to the first and reset current image index to 0? You can do that if you want. Now, to do that, an easy way here is going to go here, take this thing, and then just %, which is the module operator, with the length of images. And if you do that, click next, next, it goes back to the first, second, third, first, second, third, okay? Now, what the heck happened here? Let's go in the browser. Let's learn about module. So when you divide like 10 divided by 5, that's 2, remainder 0. So when you say 10% 5, it's the division remainder, which is 0. When you have 8, let's say 9 divided by 2, that's, if it's integer division is 4, remainder, that rest, right? Now, if I say 9% 2, that's the remainder, right? Because if I divide 9 by 2, I can only put 8. I can only put 4, right? 4 times 2 is 8, but I have 1 remaining. So that's what the module is for, to get the remainder of a division. So when you have index 0, 1, 2, and you want to reset that back to 0, because first it's 0, the index, right? Index is 0, and then index is now 1, index is now 2, and then the next time it would be 3, right? But if you % that with the number of elements, number of images, which is 3, that gives you back 0. So it goes back to 0. That's the way to reset, right? If you do like 0, that's 0, no remainder. If you do 1, it's self. If you do 2, 2. Then if you do 3, it goes back to 0. Okay, so it keeps circulating. So that's what's happening here. And make sure to add the parentheses. I think that is important. Otherwise, you might mess it up. It's mathematical precedence. First do the addition and then do the module. And the reason that I put always image length here instead of 3 is because what if I had another image? I had another image. The length is 4 now. I would have to manually change this, but usually you want the computer to figure it out. So if you put always image length, and I put another image, this value will change to 5 automatically. So I don't have to manually go and change it. So the computer adapts. Nice. Okay. Now with that and all that understanding, let's go and actually build a message board, like when you post to Twitter or X, when you post to a Facebook feed, when you post a comment on Instagram. How do we do that? Let's implement that. So I'm going to go here. Index page. Oops. Index page. At the top, let me add a link, a href to messages.html that we're going to build. Now let's create a file under src messages.html. Let's add a boilerplate. I'm going to type HTML tab, and then got a head tab, title tab, let's call it messages. That's what appears in the browser tab. Body and just something there later. Let's do h1 messages. Let's add a doc type here for the sake of specifying HTML5. Let's add a text area. Text area. That's what you're going to type. Let's add a button. Let's enclose that in a form. If you want to use the form group, we can do that. Now let's see it working. Let's go here and add our link. Actually, I want to add a link here that goes back home to index. Home. Save that, go back to index. I want to click messages, and this is what we just built. So basically, there's a link that goes back home. There's an h1 for the title, and there's a form with a form group here, class, text area, and a comment button or submit for the form. Let's add a type for the button for form submission. So type submit. And you notice the style of the form didn't change. That's because we got to link the CSS from global that has the definition for form group. Let's go here. Before the closing head tag, add a link to global.css. Now we got styling. Okay, now what's going to happen is let's add a name for the text area for the sake of it. What we call it. Let's add a label. Label comment. Let's add an ID to the text area. Let's say message form dash comment. And associated with a label, label for message dash form dash comment. So that way when I click comment, it focuses the text area. Great, you can add a name here. Let's add comment. That way the backend will understand that's comment. Great. Now for the form action here, let's see. We don't have a backend yet, so let's leave it at that. So what we're going to do right now is when I click comment, I want to add it to the bottom here. How would I do that? So let's go to the form, add an event handler on submit actually. And let's call add message function, just like we did for click. This is a submit event. So when I click submit, this function will be called. Now we need to define that function somewhere. Now let's create a JavaScript file just for the messages, messages.js to match the file name messages.html. Put it in the bottom here. And I'm going to include it, go to the, before the end of body, add a script, source, messages.js. Whoops, too many S's. And add a closing tag. That way you can write the code here. It's going to be linked. Okay, let's add a function, add message. And then let's see if it's working. Actually, I want to show you the DevTools. So one way you can see it's working is if you can print a message to the console in the browser. And to do that, you do console object.log method or function. In parentheses, you can put the message. Hello, this is add message function call. Okay, so let's test it our external browser after saving everything. I'm gonna go here, refresh, click messages. Let me open the browser DevTools, F12, go to console. Now, I think it's gonna mess up because it's gonna submit somewhere. Let's see. Yeah, it's messing up, but there's a message appearing there. So by default, the form submission will usually load a new page. So we have to prevent that from happening So what we do is typically in a JavaScript function, when we submit the form, we have to say event.prevent default, call it like a function, to prevent the default behavior for the form. But the problem is I don't have access to the event object, but that's actually always available to the handler functions for events. So you can actually add event here as the parameter. That's what we call the input to the function. So whenever you have on submit, it will call this function with an event argument there as the input. Now you have to explicitly type it here, otherwise it won't work. So make sure there's an event there. Now the name is arbitrary. I could add whatever there and have whatever here, okay? But usually we call it event. So when you click there, an event object will be provided with information about what just happened. And through that event object, there's a method or function called prevent default to prevent the form from loading a new page. That's the default behavior. Okay, going back to the browser externally, I'm gonna click comment after refresh. Actually, I wanna go back because I had some stuff in the URL. Refresh, click comment. Oops, what's happening? Something is not saved here. I didn't save my file in VS Code. Let me refresh again. Click comment, there you go. You see, when I click, that's a submit event. And what happens, it calls the function that we define at message, and it calls the console.log to print a message to the console. And the message is here. Every time I click, the message is here. You don't see it, there's this two because Chrome kind of consolidates them all, but every time I click, it's actually printing 3, 4, 5 of the same messages, okay? Let's put it 1 here and click again. You see it's appearing. Okay, so it's working. Now let me show you another way you can debug this using the DevTools. If you click sources in Chrome, it's another tab in Firefox. Let me see if I can show you Firefox. So share Firefox window here. So in Firefox, open DevTools F12. I think it's called a debugger. Yeah, and press Control P, messages.js to find a file. Yeah, there you go. Now back to Chrome. In Chrome is sources, and you press Control P, and then you type the file name you want to investigate. In this case, it's messages.js. And here we see the source code for that file. What we can do here is I can put a breakpoint to stop the execution of the program at this point. For example, if I put a breakpoint by clicking the line 4, when I click comment, the script will stop in line 4, and you can investigate what's going on at this point in time in this particular location. For example, if I hover of event, I can see what's inside that event object. And I can see there's target, that's the form itself that triggered this. I can see all the other stuff. Okay, there's more stuff here from the prototype. And the prototype of the prototype. And there's prevent default there. You see it's F, it's a function. So that property is a function. Anyway, you can investigate stuff there. And you can also go to console. I think you can open console with control backtick here. Yeah. And you can type event to see what's inside there as well if you don't want to hover. And you can open that and do all kinds of stuff here. Okay, so if you want to continue to the next breakpoint, you would press play and it would resume. So every time I click, it's going to pause in the breakpoint. So you want to remove it after debugging. So you can click the breakpoint again, or you can, on the right-hand side, right-click and remove breakpoint or all of them. And click continue. Okay, so that's debugging the DevTools. Now let me show you how we can do the message here. Add to the body of this thing. So to do that, we're gonna add a container for the messages after the form. Let me add div here. And this will be the container for the messages. Let me add an ID. Let's call message list. And what I want to do is when I comment and click comment, where I type something, click comment, I want to add a new div here with whatever I typed. If I type ABC, I click comment, I want to go to message list, inject a new div with ABC like this, okay? And then there's going to be another one every time I click comments. How we do that in JavaScript? Well, we already have the hookup for the add message here, and the console log I'll comment out, but for the reference, I'll keep it here. So first, we gotta go to the text area, find that, read the value, take that value, create or fabricate a new div, inject that value, and finally take that new div, inject into the document under the message list. Okay, those are the steps. How do we access the text area value? Well, we can use the ID. That's the straightforward way here. So for the sake of time, we're kind of running out of time. Let's just do that. Document.getElement by ID. Message for a comment. That will give me back text area. Now to access the value, I can say dot value. That's whatever the user typed. Okay, so that's going to be whatever the user typed. Now we can put this in a variable for later use. That's totally fine. Let's make it, let's call it comment equals and put the const there. Now, whenever say comment, you get what the user typed. Okay, great, semicolon. Now, we got to create a new div. How do we do that in JavaScript? We can create elements. Yes, we can create an element. First, it's going to be in memory. Nobody's going to see it. And then we take that, inject into the document. So we can say document.create element and then pass the name div as a string. And we can put that in a variable. Let's call it the div element equals. And then we can do whatever with it. Let's say I want to change the text content, div element.text content equals something. Let's add comment here. What is comment? Well, go to line 6. The definition is whatever the user typed, right? Grab the text area, grab the value, which is whatever the user typed. And then inject it to the text content for this new div. Finally, I want to take the new div and inject into the div of message list. Well, to do that, I've got to first document, get element by ID, message list, that's the ID, right? And then I got to do the following, dot append child, which adds to the end of the list, to the end of the div. And what do you want to append? The div element itself, which is in the variable div element. Let's see if it's working. There you go. And if I do comment again, keeps adding and adding and adding. Let's debug in DevTools so you can understand what's going on. So DevTools in Google Chrome, make sure to save everything. Save, refresh. Refresh, okay, I go to sources, Control P, messages.js, I got it here. Let's put a breakpoint, line 6. So I'm gonna press type ABC, type comment. Now let's investigate this. So if I hover over, I got event. If right now it's comment is undefined. So if you want this line to be run, you can go to the next line by pressing this icon here, which is basically F12 in the keyboard. So it goes to the next line. Okay, now we got comment defined, and you can see it's ABC, right? You can play around if you open the console, and if you copy this code here to understand what it is, and press enter, you're gonna get the text area. Oh, that's the text area. Okay, what happens if I say dot value? Oh, it's ABC, what I typed. So you can investigate what's going on just by having this here and opening the thing. Great. Now we see comment holds ABC. Now we can go to the next one and investigate what this div is. Oh, okay, there's a lot of stuff there. Basically, it's an empty div. And then go to the next line. Now, before I do that, see the div here? Element, the variable that holds the new div. If I look at text element, text content is empty, right? Watch what happens when I press F10 and I investigate div again. I can either hover or type it here. Let's type it here. Easier. Oh, I want to dot text content. Now it's ABC. And if I hover, scroll down, should also be ABC there for text content. There you go, right here. Great. And then you can keep going and investigating stuff. Look at this. Copy this one. What does it give me? Well, it's going to give me the message list, which I kind of can't see. But if I hover, increase there, it's right there. It's kind of empty. You see there? It's pointing to it. All right. So after that, it's going to add there. And you can resume. If you want to, before you resume, if you want to stop debugging, just remove the breakpoint. Play. Now let's investigate the DOM. Click Elements. And you're going to see here. Oh, by the way, I forgot to do mess up. Something's messed up in the DOM here. I think I messed up. Let me see. Going back. I put the closing tag. I forgot the slash. That's why the DOM is weird. Make sure there's a slash here. Okay. For the closing tag of the. Otherwise, thinking everything was under the A, which is wrong. So I save that and fix it. Anyway, going back to Chrome, you see it's weird. This shouldn't be like that, right? Let me refresh. Now the A is there by itself, and the other things are outside. Great. Let me type ABC again, comment. See what happened here? Did you notice ABC was added? Yeah, if I do it again, watch what happens. Keeps adding more and more divs. Now, obviously, it's hard to distinguish the comments, so you want to add a class and style it. So let's do that very quick. So basically, I'm going to go here. I'm going to create a new CSS for messages, messages.css. I'm going to link it. Let me put it down here. I'm going to go to messages.html, link at here after global, messages.css. Now I have access to this file. Let's add a dot message list item and define that with some border like that. And maybe some padding, 16 pixels. And yeah. And you see a message list here. I want to add a space after each. So I want to go to the hash message list. Any message list inside will have margin bottom of, let's say, 8 pixels. So they're not close together. Anyway, make sure to add this class when we're creating the new divs in the JS file. I would have to go here before we append. We gotta go div element access the class list, and then dot add the new class message list item. Basically, okay, div element that's in memory. I want to add a class. Please check the class list property, and then to that you're gonna call on add and pass the class name you want to add to that. Okay, and then when I comment ABC, you see now it's like that. And then comment another one. There's a space between. Let's go to the browser, investigate. Refresh, ABC. See now there's a class there. And if I go here on the side, .cls, oops, select the div. See the message list item without and with the class. Now if I add another one, it's there. Now, why are they separated? Because I added some styling there like this. Like there's an element with a class message list item inside an element with ID message list, which is this one. I want to add margin to the bottom. So if I remove it, they're close together. Add another one, remove this, close together. That's why I added that. Typically, you want to separate the things. Instead of looking from the perspective of the child, you want to look from the perspective of the container of all these list items, and you want to set the spacing there instead of each one. Okay, because these could be isolated anywhere, could be placed anywhere, and they could care less what they're being surrounded by. That's the way of thinking. So you want always the parent of these children to be setting the spacing between them. Okay, great. Now notice when I comment doesn't clear this. Usually want to clear that and remove that. So how do we do that? Well, after I add the comment, we can go here and say, okay, Which one is the text area? This one, right? So I can copy that. Okay, get item by ID, the message for a comment, gives the text area, and I say dot value equals empty string, just double quotes or single quotes with nothing between. So when I do ABC comment, it gets cleared. DF. Okay, simple as that. If you want to create a variable for this, since we're using twice, you can do that. Let's add a, can add some style to separate the button there too. It's kind of ugly, glued to the list. Maybe add a H2 here, latest. I think it's possible if you want to add to the top. Let's try. I wonder if there's, yeah, there might be a function you can add to the top instead of a pen child to the end. Anyway, I think that's it for this lesson, and I hope you like this, and I'll see you in the next one.